Fletcher Malone was 45 years old, the founder and majority owner of Meridian Community Bank, which he had opened 12 years earlier with a specific belief that the community he grew up in deserved a financial institution that treated its depositors as people rather than account numbers. He owned 67% of the bank. He had built it from a single branch. He reviewed the bank's daily transaction reports every morning, the way other men read the news. Not because he was required to, but because he believed the only way to understand a financial institution was to watch the money moving through it. On a Wednesday morning in November, he came home from 2 weeks of regulatory meetings in another state and found a note on the kitchen table and half of Helena's things gone. He read the note. Then, he sat down and opened his transaction reports. What he found took him 7 minutes to fully understand. She had emptied the joint account, $340,000, in a structured sequence of transfers over the 11 days he had been away. She had also cleared a personal savings account he held jointly with her from the early years of the marriage, $122,000. Total, $462,000 moved in 15 transactions, each one processed through the main branch of Meridian Community Bank. At the bottom of the authorization chain on 11 of those transactions was the name of his branch manager. Jerome Patton had worked for Fletcher Malone for 3 years, and on the security footage from the main branch, recorded 4 days before Fletcher came home, there was Jerome in the lobby, and there was Helena. And there was the moment after the final transaction cleared. The hug. 23 seconds of footage that explained everything about what the previous 11 days had been. She had no idea every camera in that building answered to him. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The transaction reports were ready at 5:50 every morning, and Fletcher read them before he made his coffee. He had started this practice the week Meridian Community Bank opened, when the daily reports were a single page and the transactions were few enough that he could read each one individually. 12 years later, with 14 branches and $4 billion in assets, the reports were substantially longer, but he still read them the same way, systematically, in the order they were organized, looking for the number that didn't reconcile. He had learned in a decade of banking that every institution's most important function was not the moving of money, but the accounting for it. The precise, documented record of what had gone where, and why and with whose authorization. He caught anomalies the way experienced readers catch typos. Not by looking for them specifically, by reading carefully enough that the thing that didn't fit announced itself. He had started Meridian because he had grown up watching his grandmother go to a bank that treated her like a liability, charging fees on a balance she needed to maintain just to avoid more fees, declining her for a loan she needed to repair a roof, making her wait in a line while the manager talked to someone else. He had taken that specific memory into every decision he had made about the bank, what it charged, how it treated depositors, who it hired, what it stood for. The bank was not just a business. It was a statement about what a financial institution could be when someone who understood the cost of being excluded built one instead. He had hired Jerome Patton 3 years ago from a regional bank in the next state. Jerome had come with strong references and a clear grasp of operations. Fletcher had read his personnel file twice, the way he read every file, and had found nothing inconsistent. He had made the offer himself. He had shaken Jerome's hand on the first morning and said, "This institution runs on trust. Everything we do with the depositor's confidence in mind." He had been wrong about Jerome in the way he was occasionally wrong about people. Not because the signals weren't there, but because he had extended trust past the moment the evidence shifted. That was his flaw. He knew it. He accepted the cost of it. What he did not accept was the cost being moved to his depositors. The note was 4 sentences. Helena had written them in the careful handwriting she used for things that required effort, the specific neatness of someone who had practiced a version of themselves for a long time and could produce it reliably. She said she had been unhappy for longer than she wanted to name. She said she needed him to understand that her decision had been made. She said she hoped eventually they could find a way to communicate civilly. She said she was sorry. She did not mention the account. He read the note twice. He set it on the kitchen table with the same placement he gave everything, carefully, deliberately, parallel to the edge. Then he opened his laptop and pulled up the transaction reports. He read. He caught the first transfer on day 3 of his absence. $30,000, wire transfer, authorized through the main branch, joint account holder's signature on file. This would have cleared automatically under normal circumstances. On day 4, another $28,000. Day 5, $31,000. The amounts varied slightly, which was how structured transactions were designed, varying amounts to avoid the automated flagging that appeared at round number thresholds. He knew this pattern. He had trained his compliance team to identify it. The authorization chain ran through the branch manager's override access on 11 of the 15 transfers. Jerome Patton had used his branch-level administrative credentials to waive the standard verification holds that should have applied to wire transfers of this size from a joint account, while one of the account holders was out of state. He called Nadia Reed at 6:14 in the morning. Nadia Reed had been the chief compliance officer at Meridian Community Bank since year 2. She was 61 years old, precise and thorough, with reading glasses on a chain and the specific calm of someone who had spent 30 years handling the exact moments when financial institutions discovered what they did not want to find. She had a gift for reading transaction records the way other people read narrative, finding the pattern in the sequence, understanding what the numbers were actually saying rather than what they appeared to say. She had not been flagged during Fletcher's absence because the transfers had been structured to stay below the automated alert threshold for each individual transaction. As a pattern, they were unmistakable. As individual transactions, they looked like authorized wire transfers from a joint account. The design of the sequence had required insider knowledge of how Meridian's compliance system worked. She was at the bank by 7:30 that Wednesday. "I'm going to walk through what I found," she said. "All of it before you say anything." She opened the first section. The transaction record, all 15 transfers, organized chronologically, with the authorization chain for each. 11 transactions showed Jerome Patton's branch manager credentials in the override field. The verification holds that should have applied, a 24-hour delay on wire transfers exceeding $25,000, plus a call confirmation requirement for transfers processed, while one joint account holder was flagged as out of state through the bank's travel notification system, had been manually waived on each occasion. Jerome had access to waive these holds. He had used that access 11 times in 11 days. Fletcher looked at the authorization chain. He caught it the way he always caught an unauthorized transaction, not with anger, but with the quiet, certain recognition of a ledger entry that had been constructed to look correct, and was not. "There's more," Nadia said. She placed the second section. The bank's internal communication records, the secure messaging system that branch managers used to communicate with the compliance team, showed a thread between Jerome Patton and the compliance queue that had been deliberately archived rather than submitted. On day 2 of the transaction sequence, Jerome had begun a compliance query about joint account wire verification procedures. The query had never reached the compliance team because it had been placed in the archive folder rather than the submission folder. Jerome had started to ask the question that would have flagged what he was doing, and then had chosen not to finish asking it. The start of the abandoned query was timestamped. Its archive timestamp was 4 minutes later. In those 4 minutes, Jerome had made a decision. Nadia placed the third section. The security footage from the main branch, days 8 through 12 of Fletcher's absence. She had pulled a specific clip. Branch lobby, Thursday afternoon, 3:47 p.m. Helena at the teller window. The final transfer clearing. Helena turning from the window. Jerome coming out of his office, his glass-walled office that looked out onto the lobby. Helena moving toward him. The hug, 23 seconds. Fletcher watched the footage once. He watched it again. He watched the specific quality of the hug, not the greeting of two acquaintances, not the politeness of a satisfied customer. The ease of two people who had accomplished something together and were glad it was finished. He set the playback to pause. He looked at the freeze frame for a moment. He thought about a Saturday morning 6 months earlier when he had come into the bank for a quarterly facilities check and seen Jerome's car in the parking lot. The branch had been closed. He had thought Jerome was catching up on paperwork. He had filed it away, the specific way he filed things that didn't yet have a complete He understood now what Jerome had been doing in a closed branch on a Saturday morning. He looked at Nadia. "Pull his full file," Fletcher said. "I want the access log for the past 8 months." Nadia was already reaching for the folder. He stood over the table and looked at everything together: the transaction record, the abandoned compliance query, the footage, the way a fraudulent sequence looked when it was complete and documented. He had seen versions of this pattern in external audits and regulatory reviews. He had never seen it in his own institution. He had never expected to see his wife's name and his branch manager's credentials in the same authorization chain. He could see the full shape, the timing of the withdrawals against his travel schedule, the use of administrative access to bypass the systems he had built precisely for this kind of situation. The Saturday meeting. The hug at 3:47 p.m. "Get Thomas Mensah on the phone," he said, "and call the banking regulators. This is a reportable event." Nadia refilled his coffee. She had the regulatory form already open. He didn't move fast. That was not how Fletcher operated. He had built a bank on the principle that sound decisions required complete information, that acting on incomplete information was how institutions failed, and that patience in the face of pressure was not passivity, it was discipline. He applied the same principle to what happened next. Thomas Mensah, his personal attorney, filed the response to the divorce petition the following week. The petition had been filed the same day Helena left. She had retained an attorney in advance. The way she had retained everything in advance. The response noted, in attachment, the $462,000 in documented unauthorized transfers and the evidence of internal collusion in bypassing the bank's security protocols. A civil fraud claim was filed concurrently. The banking regulator's mandatory review of the compliance failure at the main branch resulted, over the following 3 weeks, in a formal investigation of Jerome Patton's conduct. Jerome was placed on administrative leave on the second day of Fletcher's return. He was terminated with cause 2 weeks later, pending the outcome of the regulatory review. The termination of a branch manager for collusion in unauthorized transfers triggered an automatic referral to the State Banking Commission, and through the commission, to law enforcement. Jerome Patton lost his branch manager position. He lost his banking industry license pending investigation. The civil fraud claim against him and Helena, jointly for the conspiracy, was filed in the 3rd week. Helena's attorney reached out to Thomas twice in the first month with proposed settlement terms. The terms treated the $462,000 as disputed. Her position was that the joint account transfers were within her rights as a joint account holder. The argument was technically complex and practically weak. And Thomas acknowledged both communications without substantive response. Through all of it, Fletcher went to work. He reviewed the daily transaction reports every morning. He answered every call from his branch managers the same day. He visited 3 branches in the first 2 weeks, not the main branch, which was under regulatory review, but 3 others, doing what he always did. Walking the floor, knowing the tellers, asking the right. He did not change what Meridian Community Bank was. He tightened one authorization protocol, a second signature requirement on administrative overrides of wire verification holds, which should have existed already, and which he implemented in the first week. He did not overreact. He did not implement 10 new procedures out of the anger of one breach. One correct fix was better than 10 reactive ones. He was building on a sound foundation. It remained sound. Helena called him once, on a Thursday evening. He picked up. "I don't understand why this is being treated as fraud," she said. Her voice was composed, the specific composure of someone who has been advised to be composed. "I was a joint account holder. I had authorization. You had authorization to make withdrawals," Fletcher said. "You didn't have authorization to coordinate with a bank employee to bypass the security holds that apply to joint account transfers while I was out of state. Those are different things." A pause. "Come to the meeting," he said. "Thomas will lay it out." He ended the call. Nadia was in the chair across from him. She had been meeting with him most evenings, working through the regulatory response documentation. She looked at him over her reading glasses. "She thinks the authorization argument will hold," Fletcher said. "It won't," Nadia said. "No," he said. "It won't." Fletcher arrived at Thomas Mensa's office on the 20th floor at 8:09 in the morning. The meeting was at 10. The conference room had a long table and windows facing east, the morning light coming in flat and clean. On the table, Thomas had organized 4 binder sets: the transaction record, the compliance failure documentation, the regulatory findings, and the civil fraud claim. Fletcher sat at the second chair from the near end, Nadia to his left, Thomas to his right. Helena arrived at 9:58 with her attorney, a methodical man named Holloway, who had clearly reviewed the transaction records and understood the authorization argument's limits, but who had prepared what he could. Helena came in with the contained composure she had been carrying since this started, carefully maintained, the way a person maintains something they know is under pressure. She sat across from Fletcher. She didn't look at the binders immediately. She looked at him. He looked back without expression. Thomas opened the meeting. He walked through the transaction record, the 15 transfers, the authorization chain, the 11 administrative override entries, the standard verification holds that had been waived, the comparison between what should have happened under Meridian's standard protocols and what did happen under Jerome Patton's intervention. His voice was even from the first sentence to the last. Nadia placed the compliance failure analysis, the abandoned query, the time-stamped decision, the 8-month access log that showed a pattern of Jerome's administrative credentials being used in ways inconsistent with normal branch operations, late evenings, weekends, the Saturday morning 6 months ago. Thomas placed the regulatory finding. The State Banking Commission had completed its preliminary assessment and issued a finding. The authorization obtained for 11 of the 15 transfers was procedurally invalid, as it was obtained through the improper use of branch manager override access in coordination with a beneficiary of the transfers. The legal effect was that the transfers were voidable and the funds recoverable. Holloway had the finding in his hands. He had read it before the meeting. He set it down with the precision of a man who has been practicing law long enough to recognize when a position has run out of road. Helena was looking at the table. Fletcher stood. He gathered nothing from the table. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at Thomas and nodded. He looked at Nadia and nodded. He walked toward the door. He stopped. He turned back to Helena. He said it quietly. "The way you state a fact in a compliance review. Not with anger, not with performance. Because it was the fact that mattered. You hugged him in my lobby," he said. The camera recorded it at 3:47 on a Thursday afternoon. "I want you to understand that every camera in that building answered to me. I watched the footage on a Wednesday morning." He paused. "I thought you should know what it looked like from the outside." He walked out without looking back. It did not happen all at once. The civil fraud action was settled over the following 7 months. The $462,000 was fully recovered. The transfers had been ruled procedurally invalid. The funds were returned to the accounts, and the civil damages covered the regulatory compliance costs the bank had incurred as a result of the breach. Jerome Patton's banking license was suspended by the State Commission pending a complete investigation. The criminal referral produced a separate proceeding that moved through the system on its own timeline. Helena's divorce settlement reflected the marital estate adjusted for the fraud findings. She received what the law provided after the unauthorized transfers were accounted for. She was not destroyed. She had her own professional history and her own connections and her own capability. She returned to a version of her life that was smaller in the specific dimensions she had tried to expand and unchanged in the dimensions that were genuinely hers. Fletcher went back to work. Meridian Community Bank added one authorization protocol, the second signature requirement on administrative overrides. He reviewed the implementation himself. He trained his compliance team on it personally at a half-day session he attended and ran. He was not dramatic about the change. He did not announce what had prompted it. He made the correct adjustment, verified it was working. He promoted Nadia's deputy, a young compliance analyst named Marcus, who had been with the bank for 2 years and who had, in the course of the regulatory review, produced the most complete analysis of the authorization failure pattern that Fletcher had seen from anyone on the team. Marcus had worked through 2 weekends to finish it. He had turned in the analysis without being asked for the second iteration. Fletcher had read it twice and made a note. Marcus became senior compliance analyst that spring. Fletcher made the offer in person, the way he made every significant offer. He reviewed the daily transaction reports every morning. He answered every call the same day. He walked each branch on schedule. His name was on the founding documents, the ownership filings, the regulatory certifications, the annual reports. It was on the bank's mission statement, framed on the wall of every branch lobby, which said what it had said since the first day: banking built on trust, for the community it serves. He had meant that. He still meant it. On an early morning in March, Fletcher Malone sat in his office at the main branch before the first employees arrived. The branch had completed the regulatory remediation 2 months earlier. The compliance flag had been cleared. The main branch was operating at full capacity. He had walked it the previous Thursday, the quarterly walkthrough, same as always, and had found nothing that required immediate attention. The transaction reports were on his screen. The morning light was coming in from the east, flat and clear. He read the reports in the order they were organized, the way he always read them. The numbers were correct. The reconciliations were clean. Everything in the ledger was where it was supposed to be. He thought about a Wednesday morning in November when the numbers had not been correct, and about what it felt like to catch something in a transaction report that should not be there. The specific recognition of a number that didn't reconcile. The quiet certainty of someone who reads these reports every day and knows what they are supposed to say. He had built the institution to catch exactly what it had caught. The system had worked. It had worked the way a system works when it is built correctly and maintained with attention. It had shown him exactly what had happened. In the exact sequence it had happened, with a documentation that made the truth undeniable. He was a banker. He believed in the record. The record had told him everything he needed to know. He closed the report. He picked up his coffee. He had 3 branch visits scheduled before noon. He had a board meeting in the afternoon. He had a note on his desk about a potential 15th property for the portfolio, a community in the southern part of the county that had lost its only local bank 2 years ago when a regional chain had closed its branch there. He made a note in the margin of the report. Then, he got up and went to work. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.